Hello heroes, welcome to the Nexus. Today, we're paying tribute to Stan Lee, the co-creator of the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Spider-Man, and many other characters, has died, aged 95. But his superheroes live on, and so does the message of hope and love. We'll explore his impact on our culture over the past 60 years, and meet his dear friend and the creator of Spawn, Todd McFarlane. Excelsior! Hello, I'm Matthew Moore, and today in the Nexus we're remembering the grandfather of comic books, Stan Lee. And we are honoured to have Stan's good friend and comic superstar in his own right, Todd McFarlane there. Well, he's comic book royalty, you might say, an illustrator responsible for the regeneration of one of Marvel's most loved characters, Spider-Man, and the creator of his own character, Spawn. But first, this is how the world learned of Stan Lee's passing.
Legendary Marvel Comics co-creator and publisher Stan Lee has died.
Tributes are pouring in for an American icon, Stan Lee.
He was the singular mind and heart behind the comics and ideas that shaped countless American childhoods.
Marvel Comics co-creator Stan Lee, the brains behind Spider-Man, Black Panther, the Fantastic Four, has died. He was 95.
Lee helped usher in the silver age of comic books in the early 60s, bringing sophistication and mass appeal to a genre once exclusively marketed to children.
From Spider-Man to Iron Man, from the Hulk to Thor, the X-Men, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, all his in some capacity.
He made them more human. He had them with neuroses and with issues so that they weren't just perfect heroes.
I wanted to write about people, not about guys punching each other.
We're like number 17, 18 films into the Marvel Cinematic Universe now.
You're
they
right,
continue making so much money.
Captain America: Civil War broke yet another record at the box office.
Black Panther blew past box office estimates in its opening weekend.
Avengers: Infinity War is already shattering box office records.
Marvel equals modern mythology plus money.
His cameos in live action and even animated Marvel movies are always a fun thing to look out for.
I think of every one of them as a Stan Lee movie. The cameo, of course, is the high spot. I am so fired.
That is hilarious.
I should be on that list.
Name?
Stan Lee.
What would you like people to be left with from your career?
He wrote some good stories. I don't think about that much. You know, when I'm gone, I really don't care. It doesn't do you any good when you're gone.
Well, there was a man who created an entire fantasy world, but had his feet firmly on the ground. Todd, when you heard the news of his passing, how did that affect you?
It was a tough day because, I knew he was 95, right? We all did intellectually. But he was such a bigger than life character and a man, and I've got a dad that's in his 80s, so I sort of looked at him a little bit more like my dad there. So I don't know, it was a gut punch for me. I mean I know for others too, but I knew the day would come and I'd get the phone call. We all would, but we didn't want to give him the normality of being a 95-year-old human being. I've got this nice little soundbite of Stan Lee talking about you at one of the Comic Cons. Let's have a listen to that. Okay.
Here's a guy who writes, who draws, who has his own toy company, and he's talking about me. We could spend the whole afternoon talking about Todd McFarlane.
Hey, I'm in the cheap plastic goods business. It's a good occupation.
It's great when your hero picks up for you, isn't it? Todd, what was the relationship between you guys like? He seemed a very encouraging, very, very kind person.
He didn't have to say anything nice to me because I was going to be his friend no matter what. Actually, he could have kicked me if he wanted. And sometimes we would do that. I'd be the butt of his jokes. If people saw some of those panels, it was a little bit of Laurel and Hardy. There's a little bit of slapstick that we did. But every now and then he would sort of surprise me by saying something nice. One of his big moments he gave me was I was on one of the panels and somebody asked at the end, we do a question and answer, and you always get the standard there's 4 or 5 standard questions. One of them is, hey, Mr. Lee, what's your favorite character? Now, usually the answer was Spider-Man, right? I'd been up on the panels with him plenty of times, Spider-Man, Spider-Man, Spider-Man. And this one time, he sits and he leans back and he thinks and he goes, I'm going to make a lifelong friend. And he turns to me and he goes, my favorite character is Spawn. Now, he had this devilish little boyish look at that moment because he didn't have to say that. He knew I was his friend already. And then he knew it would shock me that he picked a character that wasn't even from Marvel, but it was just the kind of guy because he said, you know what? Even though Todd likes me and even though we're friends, I'm going to put one more smile on his face today just
sweet.
Because he's very generous.
Where do you place him in the pantheon of the comic greats?
Wow, I mean, with what's going on in the world right now, you'd have to put him at the top by far. Yeah. And here's why I say that. Here's why I'm going to say that is Jack Kirby artistically is at the top on the art side by far. But Stan and some of the artists that he worked with created such a volume, such a height of characters that in and of itself is unparalleled. Nobody's going to create the number of characters with the depth that he had. Then those characters then encase the entire globe, right? So if any of us get, like I keep saying, if I get one character and it becomes national, woo, it's a good day, good day for me. So he did dozens and dozens and dozens that ended up going globally. For me, the only other person I can put in that same class is a guy like Walt Disney.
How is it he had so many hits? It wasn't just luck, was it?
He got lucky that he came in, and he'll be the first to admit the luck was on his side. He came in early 1960s in America. They were having these Senate hearings where they're saying comic books were horrible for children and for society. So he was tasked with this new company called Marvel, although it was actually an old company. They were called Timely Comics.
Yeah.
And they said, hey, clean it up, make it a little more happy, make it, don't do, Tales of the Crypt and all those other ones that they were talking about in the Senate hearing. Do something a little more uplifting. So he had that formula down pat. The costumes were bright. They were using primary colors. The names you gave them were super easy to remember. They just everything seemed fantastic, which is why the first thing he created was the Fantastic Four. And he went from there. And even when he says, I didn't call it Spider-Man, I didn't call it Hulk.
Yeah.
He intentionally put the word incredible and amazing and uncanny in front of all.
I just want to play you a quick soundbite from Stan Lee when he's describing how he created this character, Spider-Man. It's quite interesting.
When I first wanted to do Spider-Man, I told my publisher about it, and I said, I want to do this guy called Spider-Man. He's a teenager. He's got a million problems. Everything goes wrong. My publisher said, Stan, you've lost it. He said, first of all, nobody likes spiders. You can't call a hero Spider-Man. Secondly, a teenager can't be a hero. He can only be a sidekick. And lastly, he said, you say he's got all kind of problems. Don't you understand, Stan? He's a hero. Heroes don't have problems. That's why they're heroes. That shows what I knew.
Yeah, we knew quite a bit. Todd, so that was the key difference. He actually made these heroes into three-dimensional people.
Yeah, I think again, I mean, obviously the big ones at that time were still Superman and Batman. And Superman, if you look at him, he's almost perfect, right? He's almost like a Boy Scout that he grew up right. He was always polite. He never let his emotions get ahead of him. He always did the right thing. And so he was flawless. And I think Stan said, well, let's put a little bit of humanity into these characters that we were doing so that hopefully the audience will go, maybe I could be that character someday, right? So because I have the same problems. I need to get my homework done just like Peter Parker.
Now, to be clear, Stan Lee was a writer, not an artist or penciler or inker. I mean, he worked together with artists, including Jack Kirby, as Todd mentioned, and Steve Ditko. And with those guys, he created Spider-Man, the Hulk, Fantastic Four, Black Panther, and the X-Men. What I wanted to ask you, Todd, is what the relationship between someone like Stan, who wrote it and conceived it, and the artist. Tell me, how important is that relationship?
Wow. Look, at Stan's only, and Stan would be the first to admit it too. You're as a writer, you're only as good as your artist, right? If he had the ideas germinating in his head,
yeah,
but he created a system, and I worked within it, and when I worked at Marvel, in which the writers give you this broad outline, and then it's up to us, the artists, to now conceive it. Some of it obviously was in the outline, but most of it was, then given to us, the artists that had to do it. So Stan will tell you he was attached to some of the top people in the industry at that point, and he got really lucky.
So when you came into Marvel in the 80s, and you were doing the reinvention of Spider-Man, was there a lot of resistance against your attempt to innovate?
Yep. So here's, you never want to go into any corporation, whether it's comic books or anything else, and mess with their iconic sort of theories. They think that you're changing it because you think what they're doing was bad. And for me, I wasn't trying to tweak Spider-Man because I thought it was bad. I was trying to tweak it because I thought it was so perfect that my career would be stunted by just doing a knockoff of what had already been out there for 20, 30 years. It was I didn't think it was. I also didn't think it was very current in its look. He was in the perfect 1965 John Romita.
And what did Stan Lee make of all this?
Look, the first time I meet Stan Lee, I'm 16 years old. I get to spend a day with him that was a day I'll never forget. The next time I meet him, I've now broken into Marvel. I've played with Spider-Man. I've tweaked his character. I hand him my pages. And Stan, and I know it was genuine because I saw him do it over the years, went, "Oh my gosh, Todd, this is fantastic. Why haven't more people been doing this? Why did it take so long? Why aren't the young kids doing this all the time? Why is everybody copying what I was doing in the 60s? This is wonderful." So it was a moment where I went, woo, because I thought maybe my career was on the chopping block. And from that moment, we became fast friends. So.
And then at some point, though, you decided you needed to separate yourself from Marvel around about the early 90s, and you went and co-founded Image Comics. Why did you do that?
You know what? Reading the history of comic books, I saw that essentially every one of the masters that I looked up to artistically or writers, all the creative people, eventually got pushed out. And they didn't get pushed. They didn't get pushed out on their own terms. It was, some of it was a little indignant in the way that it went. And so I know when I broke into the industry, I went in with my eyes wide open.
You're talking about the business angle of it, and if there was maybe a weakness with Stan, and he'd admit this himself, it was perhaps that the business angle, he could have got more out of it. He rose through the ranks at Marvel and at its predecessor. First as an assistant, earning about $8 a week, then a writer, then editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, and then its publisher and chairman. But he was never an owner, which is why Marvel, when it was sold to Disney in 2009 for $4 billion, he didn't cash in. And when you bear in mind, Marvel movies alone have grossed something like approaching $24 billion, Stan's own fortune, estimated at around $50 million last year, isn't that much. In fact, he once said, "I was stupid in a business way. I should have been greedier." Let's listen to him.
I never tried, when I wrote these stories, I never thought to myself, gee, I ought to try to copyright something myself and own it. It always belonged to the company. So from a business point of view, that was a mistake.
Well, let's go back to Todd. Todd, in a previous interview, you said, "I am an artist, but I learned the language of business," and that's very important.
Correct.
Why is it so important?
I wasn't wired personally to just let people run the business side of it. So I just go, I'm going to teach myself that other side of the coin so that when I'm negotiating my own deals about my art, then I'll know what it is. And ultimately, I needed to learn the art and the business together so that if I had enough success, and it's the only reason I want success, is it so I can continue to drive my artwork year in and year out.
You're the co-creator of Spawn. You've got a massive toy line, which has been very successful. Your character has gone into the movies. You've made a lot of money. I don't want to make you blush, but so did Stan Lee. But comics tend to do it for the love of it, and they go on and on and on as long as they can.
Most of us will be lifers. It's a career that will, I mean, I'll still be doing doodles when I'm 90 years old at the beach. Hopefully somebody will say, hey, Todd, can you do a Spider-Man or a Venom or a Spawn for me? As artists, we just have this panging inside that we just have to get these ideas out, or writers have to get it out of their head because these ideas are talking to us all day long. And the frustrating part is that we're only going to get a fraction of them out on paper before we actually all pass away.
Todd, I want to just take one more look at you guys side by side on stage at the Ace Comic-Con back in January of 2018 in Arizona. Was that the last time you guys appeared in public together?
I believe so. I believe so. Yeah, and it was interesting that I'd been with him on stage plenty of times. It was the one time that I was on stage with him that I went, wow, I'm feeling his age, right? I was aware of his age because, and here's why I say it, because I used to give him these questions and he used to give these big, long, interesting answers. And I could see that his energy was down that day and that he was giving me these short, sort of very curt, and I go, wow, it was too, but again, that was post his wife dying. And there was, for me, there was a noticeable difference after his wife passed away.
This is one of the questions you asked him. You said, who were your heroes when you were coming into the business? And here's what he had to say.
They didn't really have comic books when I was growing up. And I read the books. I read Superman, if you'll excuse the expression. I read Batman. I read Smiling Jack. I read everything that was a comic book. I loved them. And then one day, I got into the field and I realized I loved doing this. So I kept doing it, even though the public tried to get rid of me.
I think that affected you hearing that, Todd.
Yeah. No, he was like, like I said, he was such a larger than life personality, both in front of the screen and the back. I think the one thing that would surprise people is that generosity that he had was there all the time, because it was the reason it came across as genuine, because even when nobody was looking, he still was that Stan Lee sort of poking around. And then at that point, we couldn't have, it was a bit of a downer. I couldn't have any fun publicly with him. So instead, I'd go and visit him. And one of my, last couple visits, even to the bitter end, I'd see if I could put this one up here. I could show you.
Yeah, bring it a bit closer to yourself, to your head.
Oh,
that's it. We got it.
There we go. So,
Todd,
so what did it? He's standing there saying, "Who is this dummy?" Right? As I'm going, and I'm having a good time. I'm having a good time with him, and he's like, "Come on, Todd." So we I don't know. We like to poke each other because we didn't ever take it serious.
Stan Lee was the kind of person who always said we are one human race and we should love and respect each other, and that was his philosophy. And it's interesting, if you look at his background, both he and Jack Kirby, the great illustrator, were both born in New York, both from Jewish immigrant families. Many of their contemporaries, comic pioneers, were also first-generation Jewish Americans. Stan's family from Romania, Jack's from Austria originally, which explains why Jack Kirby drew this cover back in 1941 of Captain America smashing Adolf Hitler in the face. And I just want to come back to you on comic books and politics, Todd. Do you think there's a place for comic books to make a stand now? And are they that bold now?
I think every medium done right at the right time can say something big to their audience. Not ignore the reality of the world we all live in.
So if a young artist came to you at Image Comics and said, "I want to do something on President Trump or on the other side of the political aisle," would you be inclined to give them that space?
I think you can get your point across without having a hammer. And so you do not need to make a topic and make it so myopic about your point. I think what you do is you integrate your point into your story that make people sort of understand that that story might have gone different if you didn't sort of raise that concern one way or the other. You don't have to make it. I think grays in storytelling are way more interesting than black and white.
Fair enough. Well, Marvel's big rival is, of course, DC Comics, with heroes including Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. The two publishers actually allowed their characters to fight it out a few times, and when years ago Stan Lee was asked which was better, well, here's what he had to say.
They've been trying to catch up. They're doing the best they can, bless their innocent little hearts. And we used to have a lot of fun with them, because when we started...
Like Superman?
Yeah. When we started out selling them, you said it, I didn't. When we started out selling them, they used to, and I know this because we have friends who work for that company and we get these reports, they'd start having conferences. How come Marvel is selling so much better? And they'd study our books and they'd say, you know, I noticed they use a lot of red on their covers. Maybe that's it. And they'd start putting a lot of red on their covers. The minute we'd learn of that, we would take all the red off our covers. And our books still sold better, and that would drive them crazy. Then they'd say they use a lot of dialogue balloons on the covers, and they'd start doing that. So we would take the dialogue balloons off. And that drove them crazy, and it never occurred to them. It's just that we take the work a little more seriously, and maybe we have a little bit more of a sense of humor.
Well, let's go back to Todd, our special guest. Todd, you worked with both DC Comics and Marvel Comics.
Yep.
Which one has the better characters?
Look, here's what I can say honestly. Marvel has the longer bench by far, right? You know, DC comic books, you go Superman, Batman real quick, and then up until recently, you were arguing who was number 3. You know, you got Wonder Woman now, you got a little bit of Flash. Marvel, you can easily use both hands and keep going, right? So their bench is way longer. I think it's the reason why the movies are more successful, because they've got more to draw from. So I'd say Marvel's sort of in a better position right now for sure.
A final question for you. With Stan Lee passing, another generation has now sort of moved into the apex, if you like, for the young artists coming up, and they're going to look at you now. Do you feel this responsibility to be a role model to them?
I think there are a handful of us that can take the inspiration that people like Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and some of the other greats laid before us. I think there's going to be a giant gulf. I've been saying it for a long time. When Stan Lee leaves, there's the number 2, whoever that would be, is so far in the distance that it's not there. And the only reason I say that is the magnitude of what he created and the globalness of what he created. You know, maybe 6 of us combined may sort of get halfway there, but there's no, right now, in all honesty, there's no one person who's going to be able to take up the mantle of being the ambassador. Look, Stan was truly, I'm telling you, he was a superhero, right? I took this from his desk, he signed it, right? But he was a superhero. This man's legacy, whatever we say about him today, we will be remiss and sell him short, because 20 years from now, it will be twice as big, because what he set in motion is not going to stop. It's going to continue to flourish, and we don't even know how staggering it's going to get. But just like Walt Disney, he stopped, and now he didn't know the word Pixar, right? And now Disney's got all these tentacles, and it's 10 times bigger, and you just go, wow, Stan's going to do that. And the awards that he won, right? It's the Walk of Fame, where I was fortunate enough to be able to introduce him. He's the first comic book creator in our entire industry in 70 years to get that honor. So he legitimized what we do for a living on top of it. So we're all thankful. We're all thankful for a lot of things he did.
Well, there we go. That is Todd McFarlane talking about his dear friend Stan Lee, who passed away at the age of 95. Thank you very much for that, Todd. We've nearly run out of time, but we do have this final tribute to leave you with for Stan Lee, a truly unique man who will be sorely missed.
We're all part of one big family, the human family, and we all come together in the body of Marvel.
The comic industry as we know it wouldn't
exist in the scale that they do, and they wouldn't have the level of success that they do without Stan Lee.
You can't replace Stan Lee.
He was a pioneer. He's a legend.
Well, it's 95, but to us, he's a superhero. He could live as long as he wanted to.
He was a guy who wanted to get a point across and did it in his own special way, I guess.
He's a creative genius. He thought outside the box. He created a whole universe that changed the lives of many people, mine included.
One of the greatest of all times, the father of comic books. He's the father of comic books.
Not only did he create all these worldwide beloved characters, but he himself was a lovable guy, and he always had a smile for everyone that ever came across him.
Wow! What a comic book cover this would make.
He was really everything to the Marvel Universe.
Thank you, Stan Lee. Thank you, superhero. And thank you, super soldier.
And you're part of that family. You're part of the Marvel Universe that moves ever upward and onward to greater glory. In other words, Excelsior.